Hello, we are back again live on the Great Victoryland e-learning platform. Once again, it's time for science, and I am your facilitator. I go by the name Sir George Amankwa Divine. You can call me Morino or Moriwan for short. It's time for science, like I said. And what do we have on the table for today? What do we have on board? Today, under science, we have a topic called food preservation. Food preservation. Quickly, let's go to our objectives for today. Good. Now, let's see the objective or what we're trying to achieve after today's lesson. What do we stand to achieve? After this lesson, we want the people to be able to, one, refresh their minds on the meaning of food. After the lesson, previously we had food nutrients and we explained what food is. But after this lesson, we want you to refresh your minds on the meaning of food. Also, we want you to be able to define and explain what food preservation is. We want you to be able to define and explain what food preservation is. Also, at the end of this lesson, we want you to tell the importance of preserving food, the need or the needs to preserve food. Alright, we shall also like you to know the meaning of food poisoning. After this lesson, you should be able to know what food poisoning is. And last but not the least, you should be able to point out some common signs or symptoms of food poisoning. These are what we stand to achieve or our objectives for this lesson. Good. Now, what is food? Like we said previously, food is a nutritional substance eaten to support life. We had that in our previous lesson where we said any substance eaten or swallowed which does not support your life or does not contain any food nutrients is not considered as food. If that substance do not have a nutritional value or does not support your life, it is not considered as food. So food is a nutritional substance eaten to support life. Good. Now, what is food preservation? One important topic as far as this topic is concerned. One important question is, what is food preservation? How do you understand it? Check out the blue egg. It has been explained for you. Food preservation is a way of treating food from spoiling. We need to treat a food so that it doesn't go bad or it doesn't spoil. If you treat a food in such a way that it does not spoil, then it is termed as food preservation, meaning you are preserving the food. Now, what are the various methods of preserving food? How do we keep the food from spoiling? How do we preserve the food? Good. Now, these are the ways of preserving the food. If you don't have any in mind, don't worry. We want you to know how to preserve food. These are the ways of preserving food. One, by freezing. We can keep the food from spoiling if we put them in a fridge or a refrigerator. So by freezing is a way of treating food from spoiling or food preservation. Freezing. The second point is canning. The foods that we keep them in things like tin tomato, tin milk, tin sardine, nkulenu, all the foods in can, the things, they are called canning. It's a way of keeping food so that it doesn't spoil. Also, we can bottle them, like most especially the fruit juice. We can squeeze the fruit juice into bottles and seal them. We preserve them from spoiling. So by bottling, we can also dry our foods if we don't want them to spoil. Typical example is maize, cassava, we sometimes dry them. The fishes, we can keep them in the sun, dry them to prevent them from spoiling. So, by drying is a method of preserving food. Also, salting is one of the oldest methods of preserving food, used by even our great-grandparents. In the olden days, foods were salted. Last but not the least, we can preserve the food by smoking, like the fishes and other stuff. We can preserve them if we smoke them. Set a fire under the foods. Let the smoke get inside the food. You are smoking the foods to preserve them. These are the methods of preserving food. Let's take them once again. Methods of preserving or keeping food from spoiling: freezing, canning, bottling, drying, salting, smoking. We have other methods that you can add if you know them. It's not wrong. Just make sure it's a way of treating the food or keeping it from spoiling. Alright, the question is, why do we preserve the food? Any answer for that? Why do we keep or treat the food so that it doesn't spoil? Why do we preserve food? Just think of some before we come to the answers. Why at all do we treat food from spoiling? Reason for food preservation. Here you are. These are some of the reasons why we preserve food or we keep them from spoiling. 1. As the name suggests, food preservation is keeping food from spoiling. So we preserve food, first of all, to prevent it from spoiling. 2. We preserve food for future use. Sometimes we are not using the food at the moment, then we need to treat them in such a way that the time that we may use them, it doesn't spoil. So for future use. 3rd point, to avoid wasting the rest. Sometimes we feel like we are satisfied, we are okay, our tummy is full up, but still we have other foods, we have leftovers. If you want to use the food another time, you need to preserve them. So we preserve the food to avoid wasting the rest, else we may waste them. Like the children normally do at home. They feel like satisfied and they'll be stoning themselves with the rest of the yam and the other foods. If you don't want to waste the rest, if you don't want to waste the rest of the food, you can preserve them so that it doesn't waste them. So the next point is to maintain its good taste and nutrients. Sometimes we preserve the food to maintain the good taste and the food nutrients in them. Think of it. You boiled rice, you want to use it in the next 3 days. If you don't put it in the fridge, or if you don't microwave it, or if you don't treat it from spoiling, are you sure you can use the rice in the next 3 days without treating it or preserving it? No, I'm not sure. Like the other foods as well, if you don't maintain them well, or if you don't treat them from spoiling, you can use it. So we preserve food to keep the good taste and the food nutrients as well. Last but not the least, we preserve food to save money. If you don't preserve the food, you may spend money to buy the same food that you had. You may spend money to buy another food of such. Meanwhile, you have the same thing, but because you did not treat it or preserve it, it is spoiled. But if you were able to preserve the food, you would have saved the money you are going to use to buy the same food item. Let's list the points for preserving foods once again. To prevent it from spoiling, for future use, to avoid wasting the rest, to maintain its good taste and nutrients, and also to save money. These are the reasons why we preserve food. The question is, what is food poisoning? This is another question. What is food poisoning? Have you think about that before? Or has it come across your mind? Food poisoning, any idea? Worry no more. Here you are with the answer. Meaning of food poisoning. Now, when we say food poisoning, it's an illness caused by eating contaminated food. Food poisoning is an illness caused by eating contaminated food. How do you understand contaminated? If a food goes bad, if a food is spoiled, it is contaminated. What causes contamination? If you don't cover it, if you expose the food to flies and unfavorable temperature, if you just leave the food to the exposure of dust and other particles, it becomes contaminated. Or if a food has an expiry date written on it and it goes beyond that expiry date, it is contaminated. Example is a milk or the tin foods. There are always expiry dates. If those foods are eaten after the expiry date, they are contaminated. So, if you happen to eat a food which is contaminated, then it is termed as food poisoning. So, food poisoning is an illness. It's a disease. It's an illness caused by contaminated food or eating contaminated food. Food poisoning is an illness caused by eating contaminated food. Hope it's clear. Now, what are the signs or symptoms of food poisoning? If a food is poisoned, what are the signs? Now, one thing you must know or you must have in mind is that when we say food poisoning, it's not like someone putting a poisonous substance into a food. Let's say a poisonous substance commonly that we know is DDT. Like someone adding DDT or a poisonous substance to food. That is not mainly what we mean by food poisoning. Like I said, if a food is eaten while the expiry date has gone so far, if the expiry date has gone and you eat the food, it is termed as food poisoning. Or if you don't cover the food, you expose it to unfavorable temperature, flies, dust, and other things, it is termed as food poisoning. What are the signs or symptoms one is likely to experience when he or she has food poisoning? What are the signs and symptoms of food poisoning? 1. Stomach ache. Your tummy will be rumbling. You may have a stomach ache, paining you severely. 2. You can be throwing up. You vomit. Vomiting is one of the signs. 3, sweating. You could be sweating. You don't know what you are sweating profusely. You don't know why. It's a sign of food poisoning. You can have a loose streak. I mean diarrhea, a loose stool, diarrhea. You can experience dizziness. You feel like sleeping within a short while. Dizziness is a sign of food poisoning. Good. Now let's have the evaluations or our exercise. 1. How do you understand food preservation? 2. By which 4 means can we preserve food? How do we preserve food? 3. State 3 importance of preserving food. 4. What is meant by food poisoning? We just said it. And last of them, give 3 signs of having food poisoning. What are the signs and symptoms of food poisoning? Here you are. I'll come your way again next time. Please do the work and submit them as usual at the school premise. The name still remains George Amankwa. I am your facilitator when it comes to integrated science. I'll come your way next time. Until we meet again, it's bye-bye.